Hello and welcome to Amrita by the Book. My name is Amrita. This is my booktube, and today I am going to be doing a game slash challenge that I saw over on Scott and Nell's channel, Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. And I think the way it goes is that so basically I asked them for 5 prompts, and I need to answer those prompts within 2 minutes, and then afterwards I talk about 5 books out of those prompts that I discussed. It doesn't really make sense when I'm saying it because it sounds super involved, but honestly it's very simple, it's very enjoyable. I knew immediately upon watching their video that I wanted to do it. So thanks for indulging me, Scott and Nell, and if anyone out there would like to do this as well after watching this video, let me know and I will give you 5 prompts in the comments below. Also, I don't know how to do that cool countdown thing in the corner, so for the purposes of this video, just imagine that there's a timer up there, or if you're a super stickler for these kinds of things, set your own timer. I don't know. Okay, let's go. The first prompt was 5 books over 500 pages, and I'm a fantasy reader, so my first instinct is to just go with fantasy books, but we don't want to do that. So Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, Cloud Atlas by a person whose name I can't remember offhand, A Memory of Light, which is the last book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, A Priory of the Orange Tree by, again, a person whose name I can't remember offhand, and Shadow of the Moon by MMK. The next prompt is 5 books that I haven't mentioned on YouTube before, and I'm sure there's tons, but I thought this might be a great way to plug a few NetGalley ARCs that I received and are coming out either at the end of April or throughout May. So there's A Master of Gins by P. Jelly Clark, whom I love, and there's Anchored Hearts by Priscilla Oliveras, Secret Bridesmaid by Katie Birchall, Avidly Reads Guilty Pleasures by Ariel Zibrock, and The Lucky Escape by Laura Jean Williams. Next, 5 books in a setting that you would prefer to avoid, and it has to be, well, first off, Dune by Frank Herbert, because that does not sound like a great planet to be stuck on. Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, because I mean, do I really need to tell you why that entire world sucks so much? Then there is a book on Baghdad after the Iraq War called Imperial Life in the Emerald City, and that later became the basis for a Matt Damon movie. So that doesn't sound like a great place to be in either. Lord of the Flies by William Golding, because, you know, everyone knows how terrible that is. And number 5, Memoirs of a Geisha by William Golden, which is one of the prime examples of why you should never ever tell your story to a white man, because he is going to screw up your life over it. Next prompt is 5 books with a non-traditional romance, and I wasn't really sure what they meant by a non-traditional romance, but I'm going to interpret a traditional romance as a cishet romance, which means I can talk about a bunch of different things, right? So number 1, the Amaranthine Saga by Forthright, which is based on Japanese kitsune. I just finished reading Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, and that's a same-sex love affair in space. Then there is the Meredith Gentry series by Laurel K. Hamilton, whom everybody probably knows from her Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series, but this is basically erotica but in fairyland. I also read a book last year called How to Flirt with a Werewolf by Molly Harper, werewolves. And then there's a book that everyone loves called Cinder by Marissa Mayer that I thought was really great in concept but kind of poor in execution. Okay, I'm pretty sure this is past 2 minutes by now, but 5 books that made me laugh. And number 1, My Family and Other Animals by Gerald Durrell, Dear Girls by Ali Wong, Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. Seriously, everybody should read it. The Incomparable Mrs. Martin by Courtney Milan. And Fangs by Sarah Anderson. Okay, so those were my choices, and now I get to talk about 5 books. I decided to choose one from every category. I don't know if that's how you're supposed to do it, but that's the way that I'm going to do it. So number 1, books with more than 500 pages, and my choice was Priory of the Orange Tree, which is a book that came out maybe 2 years ago now, and people really either hated it or loved it. And I've spoken about this before in my reading 1-star reviews video, that I feel like a lot of the negative reviews were because a lot of people, like in the pre-publicity materials, were comparing this book to Game of Thrones, and this book is really nothing like the Game of Thrones, other than the fact that they both fall under fantasy, I suppose. It's a really great book for people who want a standalone fantasy novel, and it does a really good job of world building. It has very tried and true tropes in fantasy, so I feel like it's really great for newbies especially. I feel like a lot of the negative reviews were also from people who were used to reading fantasy, and then they were just like, well, this is the same old. But honestly, I feel like there is a charm to be found in a book that is well written, but doesn't really deviate that deeply from like tropes that you might be familiar with. I think it does drill into certain, like, you know, Asian things that we are used to, you know. So if it's the East, then there are dragons, and then the dragons are sort of Chinese, and there's this for Chinese or Japanese culture. And I get it. I get why people are sick and tired of those tropes and why people want to see something different. But I feel like of the various examples that dig into that kind of a trope, this is actually done rather well. And I thought the book did a really good job of setting up certain issues and then resolving them in a satisfactory manner. The ending was a little bit rushed. I feel like there was a lot of build up, and we were just building up and up and up and up. And then the climax happened like within the space of maybe a couple of chapters. I sound like I am talking you all out of reading it, but honestly, it's fine. Read it. Next up is 5 books that I haven't mentioned on YouTube as yet, and I really want to give a shout out to Anchored Hearts by Priscilla Oliveras, because it's coming out this 27th of April. So check that out and see if that is something that you might be interested in. But for this particular prompt, I actually wanted to tell you about A Master of Jinn by P. Jelly Clark, whom I adore. Like, he is such an amazing talent. I've spoken about his fantasy novellas before, and just how much information and world building he's able to pack into relatively tiny pieces of literature. But this one was a full-length novel, and I enjoyed myself so much. It's like a detective novel, but also a fantasy, and also there are these queer characters who are amazing. There's a supporting character who's basically described as a ninja in a hijab, and she is one of my favorites. The bad guys are incredible villains, and I really enjoyed how many different things he was able to bring together in the background of this novel. I mean, there is stuff about colonialism, about feminism, about the British Empire, about what it means when the world is sort of collapsing around you, about your dependence upon religion. I mean, there are a million things going on, and it's set in 1912 in Cairo, and so there's also a bit of like historical fiction-y elements. In the hands of a lesser author, I feel like this would have been a hopeless porridge, and in the hands of Clark, it is instead one of the best things that I've read all year. I was immediately drawn into it. The pace is super hard. If you are a detective fiction reader and you enjoy things like, say, Agatha Christie, then I feel like you would really connect to this. But also, if you like fantasy and you like Middle Eastern set fantasy, then it's also really great. I'm going to be doing a more complete review of this book and the world in which it's set, because there are also a couple of novellas that are set in the same world. And you don't need to have read the novellas, you can read this as a standalone, that's fine. But I want to do a more in-depth review, so keep an eye out for that on my channel. The next prompt, of course, was 5 books in a setting that I'd prefer to avoid, and my pick out of the ones that I mentioned was Imperial Life in the Emerald City, Inside Baghdad's Green Zone by Rajiv Chandrasekharan. This book came out quite a long time ago, and director Paul Greengrass used it as sort of background information for the movie that he made with Matt Damon called Green Zone. I don't remember if that movie was a hit. I don't think so. But basically, this is a book that I feel not enough people read when it came out. It did make a bit of a splash. I do remember there being very big conversations around it online. But I feel like it needed to have lived a little longer. And I feel like the movie actually did it a disservice, because if I remember correctly, the movie was a little bit more about like Matt Damon, fixing things, throwing things up, like, the usual Matt Damon in a war setting. But this book is really about that first year after the Iraq War ended, and what happened in Baghdad, like what happened when the Americans moved in and had literally no plan. Like literally they were just doing whatever occurred to them. And a lot of it was really familiar to me because it sounded a great deal like the kinds of things that British administrators and soldiers were doing in India, for example, a good 200 years before this happened. And there's a reason for that. That's why it's called Imperial Life in the Emerald City, because it really was like the Americans had arrived for an imperial exercise, and it was just staffed by the most incompetent idiots that I don't know, like I've lived in the United States, so I know that the people there are no better, no worse than anywhere else in the world. But my God, just going through the list of things that happened in that city in that 1 year, and you can literally draw a line from all of that to what is happening in the Middle East even today, and from the Middle East to what's happening everywhere. But this is also one of those books that I want to go back and read at some point, because I think when I read it for the first time, I was just so beaten down by everything that had happened. And I feel like it would help today, like 20 years after the war, to just read it and see where we at right now. And you can't go back in time and fix things, but I feel like I'm probably in a better mind space today to go back and read it. But the question is, do I want to read it? Because it's going to really upset me, and it's going to upset you too if you ever read it. So next is the book with a non-traditional romance, and I think I've spoken about most of these books except for maybe Cinder by Marissa Mayer. I do want to talk about the Meredith Gentry series by Laurel K. Hamilton, just because I have such a complicated relationship with Hamilton. She was absolutely a pioneer in her field, and she was writing these kinds of things when nobody else was writing it. And she's actually talked about it in interviews, about being in MFAs in her youth, and being told that she was basically a shitty writer because she wanted to write genre, and also genre that, at that time nobody was writing stuff like this. I really do give her props for sticking to her guns and for going back and really writing whatever it was that she wanted to write, which at the time was Anita Blake Vampire Hunter. And that was a huge, huge success, and it really kick-started something in the, not just the romance section, but also, there's a whole section of like women being badasses, but also being sexually empowered. And I think Laurel K. Hamilton was one of the writers who had a big hand in that, but doesn't really get her due for it. But at some point, I don't know what happened, and she just decided that she just wanted to write about erotica, which is fine, like you can write whatever you want to, and erotica is fine. I enjoy it myself. Meredith Gentry though, I can't remember around which book I abandoned it finally, but basically it has a plot. There is an overarching A plot, and that plot moves maybe an inch a book to the point where it was just really maddening, because I would be like just skipping through the sex to get through the plot points, and it would literally be like one line in the beginning and maybe a couple of paragraphs at the end. If you like just pages and pages and pages of explicit sex, then I guess the Meredith Gentry series is for you. And it's not bad sex, like she does write well, and she does definitely want to experiment with non-traditional couplings and with ideas that might have been considered taboo in another age. And there are certain things about it that are upsetting to me. I do not respect or enjoy or excuse the way that Hamilton uses rape in her novels, whether it's Anita Blake or it's Meredith Gentry. I don't think she does a good job writing it, and I'm sorry if she's one of your favorite authors. I just don't like it. I don't like it anyway. Like, I don't like sexual violence in a book anyway, but I feel like there is a way to actually portray it and to use it as a plot device if you want to, which, for me, like, I would prefer you didn't do that. But if you wanted to do that, then I feel like there is a respectful way of doing it, and I don't think Hamilton knows how. But I do want to give her props for being one of the early figures in this particular genre. It's complicated. And last up, books that made me laugh, I want to plug Fangs by Sarah Anderson. Now, I don't know if any of you follow her on Twitter or Instagram. If you don't, I highly recommend you do. She is hilarious, but basically she's an illustrationist, and it started out as a webcomic, and I think it's still up. I can put in a link if I find it online. I don't think she's taken it down actually, but I started reading it as a webcomic, and then she published it as a proper graphic novel, and I got it. And it's the story of a vampire girl and a werewolf boy who fall in love. And it is one of the funniest things that I have ever read. And there's one particular panel that just really made me fall in love with the series, and that is when it's not a series, it's actually just a book, but there's one particular panel where he's a little bit hesitant because it's the full moon and he's going to be transitioning to a werewolf pretty soon, and he doesn't know how she's going to take it. And so she comes home the next day and she opens the door and she finds him lying on the couch, turned into this basically a giant dog, right? And her eyes just spark up, and there's this tiny little heart that comes up on top of her head, and it is the cutest thing that I have ever seen in my life. And I really, really, really enjoyed it, and it's super cute, and it's funny, and I would recommend it to anybody. So that was my 5-book challenge. I hope that was fun for you, because it was definitely fun for me. If any of you would like to do this challenge on BookTube, off BookTube, on Instagram, wherever, let me know, and I will put 5 prompts down for you as well. Pay it forward and let me know if you check out any of the books in this list. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.